Hello everybody, my name is Brandon. Welcome back to the channel. I am here today with a review of another Stephen King book, and this time it's going to be the longest one in Stephen King's bibliography, at least so far, and that is from originally published in 1978, but then republished in 1990 as the complete and uncut edition. It is The Stand. So as I mentioned, the original novel was published in 1978, but then in 1990, he decided to add 150,000 words or more and over 400 pages to the novel that he originally wrote. That was, it ended up being like torn apart by editors because they felt that at the time, the market for a book this big wasn't there because they'd have to charge more for it. So in order to get it down, they cut a ton out. And so he released this one in 1990. Obviously, he's a much bigger name by that point, and the market's probably just in a different place. So they figure, yeah, people will buy this. And so in 1990, he releases this one with, like I said, over 150,000 words added and over 400 more pages. So that's the version I read. That's the version I'm going to be talking about. So what did I think of this tome of a book? Well, let's dive right in. Depending on which version of The Stand you read, it's going to be set in a different time. So the original hardcover, which was released in 1978, takes place in 1980 to 1981. And then the paperback, which was released in 1980, takes place in 85 to 86. And then finally, the complete and uncut edition, which I said earlier, released in 1990, it takes place in 1990 to 1991. So it just depends on which version you read, where this story takes place, at least the time that this story takes place. Regardless of which version you read, though, The Stand is going to tell virtually the same story across any of those three different options. So before we get too far here, let's just set that guy back there so I don't have to hold it the entire time. So anyway, The Stand tells the story of a flu that is sweeping its way across the country. It is a flu-like virus that takes out very quickly 99% of the population, which I'm going to date this video a little bit, but right now I'm sitting here and the coronavirus is something that is very real and very scary that is starting to make its way across, it's already hit around the world, and it's now starting to hit North America here. There's some cases in Washington at this point, some in New York, and then just kind of various areas in the middle there. So the fact that I read this while the coronavirus outbreak was just starting really added a lot to this story for me. It made it a lot more realistic, a lot more plausible, and a lot scarier because of that. So The Stand is very much an archetypal apocalyptic novel, and we're following this gigantic cast of characters, so many different characters that we're following, but the majority of them, the ones that we spend the most time with, of course, are going to be those that are immune to this virus for one reason or another. So as we're following these characters and we're getting to know them a little bit better, they start having these dreams, and they're dreaming of two different people. The first one is Mother Abigail, and the other is Robert Flagg, also known as the Dark Man, amongst a bunch of other various nicknames as well. But that's kind of his main name throughout the story, is the Dark Man, if he's not being called Robert Flagg. These two characters are the novel's representation of good and evil, respectively. And so, as the novel progresses, these characters each converge into one camp or the other, and that is essentially the foundation that King sets for this giant good versus evil battle that is at the heart of The Stand. So last year, I read Stephen King's It, and I absolutely loved it. It ended up being my #1 book that I read for the first time in 2019. So that book, well, it's scary. It's so well written, and it's extremely long. It's only just a little bit shorter than The Stand. The difference with The Stand and It, though, is that while I was reading It, I really couldn't come across anything that I thought to myself, man, this didn't need to be here. This could have been cut. With The Stand, though, there are numerous scenes, not a ton, but there are some scenes that the characters just seem to go on these long tangents that don't really add a whole lot of value to their character. You know, there's this one character, Franny. She is our pregnant character, which I know it's an apocalyptic novel with a pregnant character, but we have to remember that this was originally from 1978. So chances are that the reason we see so many characters now that are the pregnant character in these apocalyptic stories that we read, or apocalyptic movies or whatever, is partly because of The Stand, I'm sure. So I can't give any flack for that for obvious reasons. So anyway, so this pregnant character, whose name is Franny, she has this really long tangent. It is like multiple pages in the book. It's minutes and minutes in the audiobook of her just going on these specific moments that she's had with her mother that happened previously. It's a flashback type of scene. And the idea or the point of the scene is to add more depth to that relationship. Their relationship is very rocky. It never was really good. And so this is to add to that. The thing is, King has already spent countless pages building this relationship, and what he comes up with here adds virtually nothing of value to that relationship. I understand that their relationship is rocky, and I've been giving a lot of examples of how it is. I didn't need this extra bit kind of layering on top of it because it just felt like extra icing on top that didn't need to be there. This happens a number of times throughout the book. Again, not a ton. It's not everything, but it happens. And those moments really slowed it down for me and helped make the novel feel long, which it never felt long. This just felt like one of those moments where the same feelings, the same relationship could have been built in about, I don't know, half the word count, 3/4 of the word count, whatever the case may be. So I guess this is a good time to mention that I have no idea what the difference is between this version and the original version, I'm going to call it the abridged version from 1978. And frankly, I don't really care. So when King released this novel, when King wrote the original novel, it was cut to shreds because of, like I mentioned earlier, they just didn't think it was publishable at being at the length it is on the complete edition. And so that wasn't the novel he intended to release. Instead, it was this one. And that's why he went back in and added almost 400 pages to the book, because that's the novel he envisioned. That's the story he wanted to tell. So that is the story that I'm interested in. I don't see myself ever seeking out the abridged version because I just don't really care about it. I care more about the author's vision in this instance. And that behind me, that's his vision. So that's what I'm most interested in. So with that opinion out there, with those thoughts out there, let me now state that I genuinely enjoyed the vast majority of what I read in The Stand. Getting to know these characters was great, and I loved the scope that this novel encompasses. We literally start with Patient Zero. He is at a military base. He comes home to his wife and child, and ends up escaping the military base, where essentially this virus is kind of contained within that military base at the start. But because he leaves, he is Patient Zero. He drives from California to Texas, and that's where we meet our next group of people. And of course, they're infected, and then it just kind of snowballs and blossoms from there. So we start at day one, Patient Zero, and then work our way to the end. And if not the ultimate end, at least an end. And it's really cool to see that journey from start to finish. I don't think it's a spoiler to say that these 5 or 6 groups of characters that we follow all eventually converge together about halfway through the novel, or I guess not all together, but in one of two of those separate camps that I mentioned earlier, which I think that's a pretty standard thing. That's something you would expect when you're reading a novel such as this. So I don't think that's a spoiler at all. Once these groups of characters come together, The Stand became a much easier book for me to follow than it was in the first half. Admittedly, through the first half of this book, I was having a hell of a time keeping these characters straight. So King would spend, in the audiobook, it would be an hour plus. In chapters, it would be, or in pages, it would be multiple chapters on a specific group of characters or a specific character. And then eventually he would switch to somebody else, and they would start going with just a name. And I'm like, shit, who is that? I have no idea who that character is. Like, thinking back now, I barely remember any of the character names just because it's so hard to keep all of them straight. But, and so while I was reading it even, I was having a hard time. And so it would take me a few minutes as the chapter went on, because I did this via audiobook. It would take me a few minutes as the chapter went on for me to remember, oh, that's who it is. It would actually take King saying something like, oh, he played the guitar, he was playing guitar, he carried his guitar, whatever. And then I remember, oh yes, that's that character. I remember who that is. Or whatever the case may be, with a certain character trait that was distinguishable from the rest. And so names were just lost on me. It really took those distinguishable character traits for me to separate it. And the problem was I would be listening to the book and it would take me a few minutes to remember, oh, okay, or to realize this is who they're talking about. And then I have to think back. Okay, so this has happened to that character. Okay, now I'm in with it. And so as I'm doing that thinking, as I'm trying to establish who these people are, I'm not focusing on the story as much. And so I'm losing a little bit of it that way. But with the, once the characters come together and we get that second half, then the story's really able to kind of take over. And for me, at least, it really took me over in the second half. It kind of swallowed me at that point, and I needed to know what was going to happen next. That snowball really started rolling downhill in the second half of the novel once these characters come together. So for me, that's when it really picked up, and I was really able to start focusing whole hog on that story, which was a really interesting and very cool story to be told. So it worked out really well. One of my favorite aspects of this novel is not something I would have expected coming in, and obviously I had no idea this was even in the novel coming in, but was watching these characters after they converge together, watching them create, basically watching them play politics. So they go from creating something from nothing and watching these political ideas kind of be tossed back and forth on what will work, what won't. Who do we need to make our goals come true? I mean, very much playing politics. And I had no idea I enjoyed something like that, but I thought it was fascinating. If you guys know of any other novels that kind of take that idea of starting a whole new political system, or just taking ideas from the current political system we have and importing them into this new world, please let me know about those down in the comments below, because I've discovered that I really enjoyed those aspects of it. And I'd love to read like either more of a book about that or a full book about something like that, because I thought it was just fascinating. I'm honestly a little bit disappointed that other apocalyptic material I've read in the past or consumed in the past has not done more with this political aspect like The Stand does, because I think it's a really cool idea, and there's like so much that can be done with it. And so I think, I would love to see this more. So if there are, I'm sure there are others out there. I don't know anything. So please let me know down in the comments below if there are other, it doesn't even have to be apocalyptic, just dystopian, whatever, other novels like this that really play the politics game and rebuild or create a political system out of nothing or out of the rubbles. Going back to the idea of scope with this novel, I had no idea that this was a story of good versus evil, that this was such a gigantic idea that King was going to tackle. I had no idea. And you wouldn't really get that impression throughout the first half of the novel at all. The first half of the novel is entirely singularly focused. Obviously not literally, not just to one person, but to these specific groups of people as they're making their way to what they perceive to be safety, or at least to following the dreams that they have to find Randall Flagg or to find Mother Abigail, whatever the case may be. You spend a lot of time with these characters and you get to know them. You start really caring about them. At least I did. I started really caring about what their outcomes would be. You follow their plights. And then finally, once the second half starts, you realize, wow, this is a much larger story than King makes it out to be. And that whole dichotomy is really brilliant, because it lets you connect on a personal level with what's going on, and then just makes it so much bigger, makes it about so much more than just you, or in this instance, so much more than just these characters. And that's just really smart writing. For my money, I can't say that one half of the novel is better than the other, which idea I appreciated more. I did already say that I found the story easier to follow and that it sucked me in quite a bit once we all converged together. But I loved spending time getting to know these characters. And without that time spent, I don't think the second half of the novel would have been nearly as interesting, nearly as engaging, or nearly as important without that knowledge of the character, without that relationship that King builds for these characters. I already said, I think some of the writing could have been cut down a bit, because once I had a relationship established, I'll go back specifically to Franny and her mother. That relationship was already established. I understood that they had a rocky relationship, and the additional tangent, the additional ramblings that she goes on did very little to add any more depth to that. And so I just didn't need it, but I didn't hate it. It just made the novel feel a little bit longer than it needed to. The Stand marks the 10th Stephen King novel I've read in only the past 18 months or so. And I can honestly say that I've not read an author that I think does a better job at character building, at relationship building, at world building than Stephen King does. He is fantastic, and that is on display tenfold here. I think the character building is a little bit better in it because there is not that excess, that fat that can be trimmed, whereas here I think there is a little bit of that, but still, the relationships he builds is fantastic, and that payoff in the first half, that build up in the first half really pays off in the second half, thanks to that incredible writing, that knack for writing relationships and characters that King has. I was completely invested in the outcome of these characters, and because of that, King was able to manipulate my emotions, both positively and negatively, on the way to the conclusion that really kept drawing me back in. Speaking of the conclusion of this story, for me, this is another one where it's really about the journey there, and the conclusion is just, it's a conclusion. But to be fair, if you spent 1,100 pages building up this story, which equates to almost 48 hours in audiobook form, how can any conclusion, how can any singular climax live up to the epic scope that you've already established leading up to it? And because of that, I don't really mind the conclusion at all. But I will admit, when it happened, I did say, that's it? But I don't know. So take that for what you will. I don't think it's terrible, but it does leave a little to be desired. I'll admit that. And of course, like anything, there are other things I could talk about specifically with the conclusion, but I don't want to give any spoilers for this review, so I'll just leave it at that and move on. The Stand is over 1,100 pages, and it's almost a 48-hour audiobook. So no matter what version you decide to go with, it's going to take dedication to complete The Stand. Much more so than I felt with it, I did feel the length of this book, even though I was enjoying the vast majority of what's here. I do think that it is still the best Stephen King novel I've ever read, but The Stand has taught me the meaning of the word epic. Though it only covers about 7 months of time, The Stand introduces a countless number of characters. It has them trekking across most of the United States, and then it has them converge for this ultimate battle of good versus evil. And all the while, King doesn't skimp on the details. So if that sounds like something you'd enjoy, then definitely check out The Stand. So I am giving the complete and uncut edition of Stephen King's The Stand 4 out of 5 stars. All right, so that is going to do it for my review of The Stand. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Please let me know down in the comments below, what did you think of this book if you've read it? Is there something major that I left out of my review? Of course there is, but that's how it goes. But anyway, if you do talk about this book, please leave it spoiler-free down in the comments so that if there is anyone that has not read it yet, they won't be spoiled by reading the comments below. Also, let me know, what should my next Stephen King review be? I would love to have some opinions from you guys. I have, like I said, read 10 of them. I'm not going to name them all. Pet Sematary, Carrie, The Stand, It. I don't know. I've read 10 of them so far. I just counted the other day because I was curious. So leave some recommendations down below. Let me know what you'd like to hear me review next from Stephen King specifically, and I'll try to prioritize that for next month. As always, if you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to Cinefessions here on YouTube. And if not, thank you anyway for watching. I really appreciate it. All right, guys. So that's going to do it for today. I want to say thank you to everyone for watching, and I'll catch you next time.